Happy Halloween. Leave now while you still can.
Leave now before Master finds you.
Who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? Who is that knocking at my door? Be gone with you.
Hello everyone, today's video I'll be talking about Frankenstein the Monster from Hell, the last Hammer Frankenstein movie. As I said before in the last video, the horror of Frankenstein was a failed attempt reboot for the Hammer Frankenstein series. I guess after the poor results of Hammer figured let's bring back Peter Cushing and try the old format. Despite Dr. Frankenstein dying in a fire and must be destroyed, then again, back in this time period in film series, they did not care about continuity at all. It's not one of the wars, it's one of the weakest Hammer Frankenstein movies. It's not memorable, only made for a paycheck. Just like Universal in the 1940s, Hammer was just fresh out of ideas, and they had no idea what else they wanted to do, or what else they can do. I haven't watched this movie in a while since 2019, when I did the Hammer Frankenstein reviews with my friend Christian back then. Again, my opinions have not changed that much since the last time I saw this movie. David Prowse plays the monster again. He looks terrible, looks like something out of a bad Planet of the Apes B movie. Or hey, it looks like that creature from the Twilight Zone episode with William Shatner. Recently I saw a post on social media. One person compared the look of the Frankenstein monster in this movie to the Thomas Edison 1910s Frankenstein short. I could see that. I don't know which David Prowse monster makeup effect was worse, this or Horror of Frankenstein. It's very ironic about seeing David Prowse as the monster in this movie and a foreshadow how both David Prowse and Peter Cushing will be in Star Wars 3 years later. Peter Cushing played Grand Moff Tarkin, and as I said in my Horror of Frankenstein video, David Prowse played Darth Vader in the costume, while James Earl Jones did the voiceover. Terrence Fisher's back as the director once again. It's said how he started a dynasty with Hammer, and this is his last film he directed. He retired after this movie's failure, and he died in 1980 from a heart attack. I guess he really needed the money that bad and desperately. We don't see Dr. Frankenstein until 20 minutes into the movie. It was nice to see Peter Cushing back as Dr. Frankenstein again. When I was watching Horror of Frankenstein, it reminded me how much I missed him as Frankenstein. While this may not be one of my favorite Hammer Frankenstein movies, he's the one okay part in this movie. Again, no matter the movie, Cushing always managed to give it all at his best. He's not the problem in this movie and not to blame for this movie. It's the writing and the poor story direction of this film. Here's a little story right here. Sorry if this throws you off and off topic, but I had to mention this part. Around this time in Peter Cushing's life, he had gone through some tragedy in his life. He lost his wife 3 years prior and was in a bad state of depression. And I think acting in movies kept him busy to keep himself going. But it was an everyday struggle for him to keep on going with his life. There's a rumor that the actors and Hammer Studios felt and noticed Cushing was sad inside out without showing us signs of emotions, sadness, sorrow, and depression. Cushing was very depressed after losing his wife. At the same time, Cushing still managed to be a professional when it came to making movies. From what I read, he really loved his wife. After she died, he felt like part of him died too. Cushing almost attempted committing suicide, but reading this poem prevented him from killing himself. I'm honestly not sure what poem it was, to be honest. I'll admit, I'm not a marriage counselor, I'm not married, and I'm not an expert in psychology. I don't know what it's like to be married, but from reading this story and analyzing this on Cushing's life, it seems like it's never easy when you lose someone close to you, especially when you really love someone, your soulmate. You can't imagine life without them. Reading this part about Peter Cushing reminded me of my grandfather to a certain degree in a different way, how my grandfather felt. Sad, depressed after he lost my grandmother in 2002, dying from ovarian cancer, and she never smoked a cigarette a day in her life. That experience was one of the biggest tragedies he ever went through in his life, especially how they were married for 49 years, almost making the 50-year mark anniversary accomplishment. It's also sad for me in a different way because even though I remember my grandmother, but it saddens me I never got a chance to connect to get to know her like I did with my dad's mother. my other grandmother. Again, not to get off topic, when you all remember when I did my Splendor in the Grass movie review, I mentioned how I felt connected to the character of Natalie Wood's character, Deanie, being heartbroken, depressed. Reading how Cushing was heartbroken, somewhat relatable to a certain degree, but different when my ex dumped me. I was depressed, heartbroken, but at the same time I'm glad we never went far, but that's a little bit different and personal right there that I won't get into right now. After my ex dumped me, making my YouTube videos got me through the breakup and have kept me going in life. And besides my YouTube channel keep me going, my little niece and nephew keep me going in life too. Okay, sorry for this off-topic random story. Back to the review. Dr. Frankenstein works at a mental institution as the head doctor, and he goes by a fake name, and yet the Warren and the whole staff knows that he's the real Dr. Frankenstein. When I was rewatching this movie, I kept thinking to myself, this does not make any sense. That's like if Batman did not wear his mask and his real identity would be exposed. Or if people were smart enough to see that Clark Kent is Superman without the glasses on. Frankenstein says that he's not a murderer. Do I need to show him clips of the last movie where he practically murdered people? I mean, my God. Did Hammer really forget about that? In this movie, Dr. Frankenstein is not a villain like he was and must be destroyed. He's back to being an anti-hero again. He is noble in this movie where he stands up for his patients at the asylum. But again, despite being an anti-hero, Frankenstein is still not a good person. Just like Hans, Carl, Christina, the monster from Evil, and Frederick, there's this one patient named Professor Dublin who was a violinist who was also another sad, tragic character. Frankenstein drove him to insanity and leads him committing suicide so he can operate on his brain and create a new monster. Again, what a bastard. It was interesting to see Dr. Frankenstein laugh at a joke. That's something you never saw in past Hammer Frankenstein movies. Dr. Frankenstein did not take me as a person who did not have a sense of humor. Dr. Frankenstein mentors a young student named Simon. This character reminded me of Hans from Revenge of Frankenstein. He likes, idolizes, and wants to be like Dr. Frankenstein. But he does see how Frankenstein is just as crazy as the inmates are at the asylum. This part to me was so cliche. I didn't hate this character. I didn't find him interesting. I found him boring. Again, if he had a better arc and direction, it could have been a better character. There was potential, but it's sadly wasted. The one thing that surprised me Hammer did not do is name the assistant named Hans again, like they did in Revenge the Created Woman. I guess Hammer finally thought, nah, we used that name too many times. But there is a character named Hans in this movie, but I don't remember this character at all. The character Sarah was a mute, just like that pretty redheaded homeless girl in Evil of Frankenstein. But unlike her, she did not speak until the end of this movie. She was not a bad character, again. There was nothing special and memorable about her. She had potential, but to me this character was wasted. I read that Carol Monroe was offered the part of this character, but she turned it down because she did not want to be nude in this movie. The director who's the ward of the institution is a real piece of shit. Frankenstein catches him having sex with one of the inmates. It surprised me no one didn't report him. Then again, if Frankenstein reported him, his undercover identity is blown. That would also mean Frankenstein would not have any power or control of the asylum if he turned the director in. I hated this character. He was a real piece of shit, and I wanted him to die. The setting takes place in a mental institution. This made me think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest meets a Frankenstein movie. No disrespect to this film, it tried way too hard focusing on mental illness, which I'm not against or offended. I feel like there's other movies that touch upon this subject better and did it well. Like, for example, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, A Beautiful Mind, and Silver Linings Playbook. I'm probably missing others, but you get the idea. Seeing Dr. Frankenstein and Simon go about their routine helping the patients was interesting, but it was too long and slow pace. This part could have been speeded up a little bit. But then again, I found the pace in this movie to be a drag, long, boring, and slow at times. One patient claimed that he was God, and Dr. Frankenstein said that he was not the first and last patient to claim that. The movie ends setting up for a sequel, but instead this is a cliffhanger ending that I guess they thought if this movie was a success, let's make another sequel. But due to the movie's poor performance, they never made another one. One way you can look at this, Dr. Frankenstein is trapped and restarts all over again in a new experiment. But then again, I could be reading too much deep into that. I think the other reason why this movie did not do well is because this came out almost around the same time as The Exorcist. Hammer could not keep up with the competition with the modern horror movies of the 1970s at this time period. Audiences did not want to see Hammer anymore. Gothic horror was a thing of the past. Horror fans wanted to see horror movies like The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Omen, because they were groundbreaking horror movies at that time in horror film history. Modern audiences thought Hammer was outdated, just like how modern audiences in the 1950s thought Universal was outdated. Again, I don't hate this one. To me, it's a forgetful movie and had some potential interesting ideas, but it was all watered down, wasted, and went all out the window. Just like Horror of Frankenstein, I probably won't be going back to rewatch this again on more viewings, but this was a slight semi-upgrade to Horror of Frankenstein. This movie was so cliche. What was so different about this Hammer Frankenstein movie that I have not seen done yet? One last thing, for a movie I did not care for that much, I will say it was one of the goriest Hammer movies. As I wrap this video up, I wanted to briefly talk about the home video media of the Hammer movies. Ever since I got into these Hammer movies, finding these movies on home video was a mess, annoying, crazy, and difficult. These movies are owned by so many different companies, I don't understand why that is. One would think that Hammer would have just let one studio distribute their movies instead of multiple ones. Unlike Universal, where I own all the monster movies in a DVD Blu-ray box set, I had no choice but to buy these one at a time. As you've seen in my videos of the Hammer Frankenstein Blu-rays in the background, this is the only Hammer Frankenstein movie I do not own on Blu-ray yet. At some point I would like to get this on Blu-ray just to complete the set. I'm a completist semi to a certain degree, but it depends on the movie series. I know Hammer does have a box set of all the movies, but it's only in region coding, which does not make any sense. Region coding is ridiculous. In the 90s, it was hard and difficult to find these movies on VHS tape. When DVDs came along, it was hit or miss. Sometimes they were out of print depending on which Hammer movie it was. When they were out of print, they were very pricey to buy, sometimes like over $100 or more. Sometimes when they were out of print, the only way you could buy these movies was at Comic-Con conventions as a bootleg. In today's modern world of Blu-ray, it's been a little bit easier somewhat. I highly doubt that Hammer will release these movies on 4K. I'm not holding my breath on that one. If they ever did, I'm not sure if I'll upgrade it to 4K. Blu-ray is enough for me, but at the same time, never say never. Despite Shout Factory has released Blu-rays of the Hammer movies, it would be nice if maybe Shout Factory released a Blu-ray set of all the Hammer Frankenstein movies. The Curse of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed are owned by Warner Brothers. Revenge of Frankenstein is owned by Columbia Pictures. Evil Frankenstein is owned by Universal. Frankenstein Created Woman is owned by Hammer, but was distributed by Anchor Bay for DVD and other releases. The Horror of Frankenstein is also owned by Hammer. And Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed is owned by Paramount. I read that the Blu-ray to Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed added censored scenes that have been restored. I'm curious to check out those scenes and get the Blu-ray for that reason. I hope one day Hammer will get their acts together and release a US box set, but again, I'm not holding my breath on that one. The Hammer Frankenstein series really shaped the horror genre. They really brought a lot of uniqueness and creativity, interesting ideas, getting out of their comfort zone, taking big risks. These are must-watch for Frankenstein fans and horror fans, and very important for all the horror series. That wraps up the Hammer Frankenstein series. Tomorrow we're heading to Phase 2 of Hammer's Dracula series, starting with Horror of Dracula. Stay tuned.